bad at making videos, but I'm going to try anyway. This is like attempt number 4, so hopefully this works out. Okay, so right now we're looking at an angiogram. We're going to start off with looking at coronary arteries. The first thing I like to do when looking at angiograms is trying to orient myself. So first of all, we know, or we should know that we're looking at the heart, okay? You can kind of imagine the outline of the heart with all these vessels are kind of outlining it, and you see a very faint shadow. I wouldn't worry about that too much. One of the first things I try to look for when looking at angiograms of the heart when we're looking at coronary arteries is I try to find the LAD, okay, because to me that's one of the most obvious landmarks. So the LAD should be going to the apex of the heart, which is right around here, okay? It kind of, you know, some people were saying in lab that it looks like multiple vessels are going here, but LAD goes more or less straight to the apex, okay? It's kind of given away here because it's labeled, but LAD is more or less going straight to the apex over here, okay? These other guys are kind of like meandering around. They are not going to the apex. In fact, this meandering guy over here, so we have our left coronary artery, okay? It's giving rise to 2 branches. So you should know that the left coronary artery has 2 branches. One is the LAD, and one here is labeled CA. What does that stand for? That stands for circumflex artery, okay? So the left coronary artery branches to form the LAD and the circumflex artery. The circumflex artery has this kind of camel hump over here as it's hooking around behind the heart. And then it goes off to supply the AV sinus, the sinus between the left atrium and the left ventricle. And it also has a marginal branch. But for imaging purposes, we're not going to worry about marginal branch and that AV stuff. For imaging purposes, we're just worried about left coronary artery, okay, LAD, and the circumflex artery, okay? You might be tempted to think that the LAD also has a little camel hump that looks suspicious, but remember, LAD is going pretty much straight to the apex. The circumflex artery has this camel hump, and then it, you know, branches off and does all this meandering stuff, okay? We're going to look at another angiogram to try to make more sense of this. So here again, you can kind of imagine where the outline of the heart is. You see it faintly darker. You can't always depend on that. But then there is a vessel that is going right to the apex of the heart over here, and that is LAD, going more or less right to the apex, okay? If we trace it back, we're at our left coronary. We know that we have to have our left circumflex coming off our left coronary, and that's this guy right here. It's going to have the camel hump. It has branches that we're not going to worry about for radiology, but you will most likely be tested on that on the practical if those things are pinned. So again, left coronary artery going to the LAD, which more or less goes straight to the apex of the heart. And then the other main branch of the left coronary artery is left circumflex, which has the camel hump as it's going around behind the heart. Okay. This is another angiogram of the heart. I just want you to appreciate how it looks very different from the previous 2. These guys have all these different branches. We can see the outline of the heart a lot clearer. Here, it looks a lot more simple, and we're just looking at the right coronary artery. It's labeled here, okay? I wouldn't worry about this branch, the SA no business. Just know we're looking at the right coronary artery. In most people, the right coronary artery gives rise to the posterior descending, and here we see it supplying the intraventricular septum and the diaphragmatic surface of the heart, okay? So just know right coronary artery, the angiogram looks a lot simpler than everything with the left coronary artery. Okay, we're going to look at the heart again. A lot of this is review. I think it's nice to look at this picture without the colors. We can see the faint outline of the heart, okay? Here is the apex. This over here is the base. And what chamber makes up the base of the heart? The left atrium, remember, makes up the base of the heart, okay? So over here we have the left atrium. Here on the diaphragmatic surface, we're going to see a lot of left ventricle, okay? And then even in this image, you can see this nice loopy thing coming up off of the heart and going down. And we know that here we have our ascending aorta, aortic arch, and our descending aorta. Okay, so just trying to orient ourselves. Okay, let's take a look at this image. So one thing that you can first do when you're looking at this sort of cross-section of the CT is try to identify how high or low you are, how cranial or cranial you are in this CT slice. So are you high in the thorax or low in the thorax? Here we are high in the thorax. How can we tell? We have a nice bony landmark right here, which is the what? That is the manubrium. Okay, it's quite large. If we're seeing sternum, the sternum is going to be much smaller. And this patient has breasts right here, which kind of give us a good sense that the manubrium is quite large. If we're seeing sternum, sternum would be smaller. We can't always depend on breast being present, but here the sternum is taking up, the manubrium is taking up quite a lot of space in the anterior chest wall. And we can also see clavicles coming off of that, okay? So we're pretty high up in the chest. We also know because we're not seeing any heart. The heart takes up a lot of the chest. If we remember this image right here, the heart is taking up quite a lot of the chest. So if we're not seeing any heart, we must be higher. So here we are seeing all of these guys, which must be vessels coming off of the heart and other stuff in this region. Okay, so I think it's nice if you're looking at things to start with things that are easier to identify. So here we have this kind of white ring that looks like it's surrounding this black area inside. You know, when we're looking at black, that means we're looking at something that's not very dense at all. Here specifically, we're looking at air. So this air-filled tube is the what? The air-filled tube is the trachea, okay? And what is running right behind the trachea? That is going to be our esophagus. So remember that important relationship. We have the trachea anterior to the esophagus. Let's look at a zoomed in picture with some pretty colors. So again, we see our trachea right here outlined in light blue, our esophagus right behind that. And then we have all these other things going on. So let's try and think of what they are. First of all, let's think of what this big guy over here is. Okay, it's kind of, this is where we normally see a certain structure, and it's misleadingly colored in the color that, you know, a lot of our slides are used to color the ascending aorta, but this is not the ascending aorta, okay? Because there's no descending aorta. The descending aorta should be down here, but there is no descending aorta. Also, we're pretty high. We're at the level of the manubrium. So we've already gone above the arch of the aorta. This up here is a vessel that is running very anterior to the chest. It's running in front of all these other circular guys. Can we think of what this vessel here is? That is the left brachiocephalic vein, okay? So if you remember when we're this high up in the thorax, the superior vena cava, we don't see it anymore. We see the branches of the veins that are going to dump into the superior vena cava. So up here, we have the left brachiocephalic vein, okay? Over here is maybe where we'd normally see the superior vena cava if we were lower down in the chest, but since we are up high, this is going to be our right brachiocephalic vein, okay? So here we have our right and our left brachiocephalic veins. If we go lower, they're going to merge to become the superior vena cava. Okay, so then we have these three little guys that are posterior to our left brachiocephalic vein. Okay, can we try and think what these might possibly be? These are the arteries coming off of the arch of the aorta. So if you imagine the aorta is going to be lower in the body, it's going to arch over. You know, you have your ascending, you have your arch of the aorta, and your descending, okay? So these three circles right here are the arteries coming off the arch of the aorta. So if we're thinking of what comes off of the aorta first, Is that going to be this orange thing or this green thing? It's going to be the orange thing, okay? Because remember, the ascending aorta is roughly, you know, in this area for lower in the chest. We have our arch coming over and then our descending. So the thing that comes off first is coming off closer to our ascending aorta. So this orange circle comes off the aorta first. And the first thing that comes off the aorta is what? That is our brachiocephalic trunk, okay? The next thing that comes off our aorta, so we're thinking our ABCs, so B is our brachiocephalic trunk, C is our left common carotid, and our ABCs, S is our left subclavian, okay? So we see BCS, brachiocephalic trunk, left common carotid, and our left subclavian coming off of the arch of the aorta. And in the next picture, we have everything labeled. You guys can look over this slide. Again, it is on chalk. Okay, here, this is review from day 4 of DMTA stuff. Again, when you're looking at something like this, I would recommend starting at things that are very obvious. So this, to me, is a pretty good landmark. That is our left ventricle. It's labeled here. You can see the thick muscular wall. You can see the intraventricular septum. And remember, the thick muscular wall of the heart is going to be kind of forming this circle around the left ventricle. Okay, then this big thing coming off the left ventricle has to be the aorta. And remember, we were just talking about the branches of the aorta. So this little guy sneaking out is the brachiocephalic trunk. And again, we see the left brachiocephalic vein here is very bright and white, which we usually associate with bone, but this is just happens to be a high contrast image, and we know there are no bones kind of floating around like this in the middle of the chest cavity because we are posterior to the sternum and all of that stuff. So this guy is not a bone. This is a left brachiocephalic vein that's running in front of everything that is branching off of the aorta. And we can see the brachiocephalic trunk sneaking out behind the left brachiocephalic vein. Okay, other things to look at, we have the right ventricle. Okay, remember it makes up most of the anterior part of the heart, the right atrium, which is going to be the right margin of the heart. The patient's right margin of the heart is the right atrium. Okay, the pulmonary trunk in this slice, we're not seeing it hooking up to the right ventricle, but if you remember in one of the images we were looking at during lab, I believe on day 4, we saw the right ventricle connecting to the pulmonary trunk. Okay, but you should still know the relationship that the pulmonary trunk is going to be slightly to the left, patient left of the aorta. It comes off of the heart in front of the aorta. So if we moved more anterior in this patient, we would see the connection of the pulmonary trunk and the right ventricle, and that would be coming up off of the heart anterior to the aorta and then sneaking around to the left. Okay, this is another angiogram that we need to be able to identify vessels in, and this is focusing on the things that are coming off of the aortic arch. So remember ABCs, first thing is our brachiocephalic trunk, very clearly coming off first off of the ascending aorta. Then we have our C, our left common carotid. Then we have our ABCs, our S, the left subclavian, okay? Coming off the brachiocephalic trunk, we can see our right subclavian, okay? And this is clearly going off over to the shoulder area. If we imagine, you know, this is the neck of the patient and all that good stuff. And then we have our, this is ignore thoracic, this is our right internal mammary artery. Okay. So in the, I'm going to go through the review PowerPoint also really quickly, and then we'll look at this image again. So let's move on. So this is a CT slice that is inferior to the one we were looking at earlier. If you remember the one earlier, we saw the trachea that was still before the bifurcation. Here we're at the level of the bifurcation. So we see this nice view of the carina, still have the esophagus running behind everything. Now we have our SVC, our right and left brachiocephalic veins have joined up to make the SVC over here, superior vena cava. And now we're seeing our ascending and descending aorta. So we're below the level of the aortic arch. And we also see our left pulmonary artery We call this left pulmonary artery because we kind of see it sneaking off to the left, and the arrow is pointing at, the leftmost tip of it rather than over here. If the arrow was pointing over here, closer to the ascending aorta, I'd be more tempted to call it the pulmonary trunk. Hopefully Dr. Ross doesn't do any tricky stuff with you like that, but I don't think he will. Okay, here we're moving one slice lower than this one, and we know that now because we can see the left main bronchus. Clearly this dark air-filled space going off to the left, we can't really see the outline of the right main bronchus. That happens sometimes, but it is there. We still identify the superior vena cava, ascending aorta, descending aorta, and now, it's pointing to this part over here, which is the pulmonary trunk. If the arrow was over here, what would we call that? This I would call the right pulmonary artery, okay, because we see it going off to the right, and we can see maybe a little tiny wisp of the left pulmonary artery still. Okay. This yellow guy over here is a little bit tricky. I feel like when we talked about in lab, it was kind of easily forgotten, but this is the left superior pulmonary vein that is sneaking right under the pulmonary trunk. So remember that the pulmonary veins are entering the left atrium, and they're sneaking right underneath the branches of the pulmonary trunk. Okay, other things to note, we still have our esophagus running posterior to everything here, and the azygous vein, which we don't want to forget about. Okay, this is another image. Again, starting with things that are easier to identify. Let's think about what H could be. H is the right ventricle. Okay, we see it making up a lot of this anterior border. Right ventricle makes up most of the anterior border of the heart. Okay, so then what is making up this back here? What is F? F is the left atrium. Okay, remember the left atrium makes up most of the base of the heart, which is the most dorsal surface of the heart. Okay, so then G is pointing at a very specific structure over here. Okay, G is pointing at the aortic valve. You can very faintly see the leaflet here. Okay, so if that kind of gave it away, but that means B is pointing to the aorta, which is this big guy here. Okay, if we're thinking about what E is connecting to what we called the right ventricle. And as we notice, it's kind of coming up to the patient's left of the aorta. So E is the pulmonary trunk. Okay, it's coming off anterior to the aorta and then sneaking a little bit to the left of the aorta. So imagine we're looking in at the patient's chest. Imagine we're standing to the left of the patient, looking through the patient's chest. So we're looking kind of at a right slice of the patient, right half of the patient's body. If that didn't make any sense, just ignore what I said. Okay, so we're saying B is the arch of the aorta. Then we have this thing coming off the arch of the aorta. What is A? A, again, is the brachiocephalic trunk. We can see this internal mammary artery coming off of it. So that's why we call it brachiocephalic trunk. The left common carotid doesn't have anything coming off of it that's going back down into the thorax. Okay, other things that we should identify, these little dark holes over here. If things are dark, they're filled with not very dense material. These specifically are filled with air. So like I said, we're looking into the right half of the patient. So we're going to be looking in towards the holes going into the patient's right lung. Since we're not seeing, one big hole, if we saw one big hole, we would call that a main bronchus. We're seeing two holes here, okay? So these are two of the branches off of the right main bronchus, and these have funky names that are kind of annoying, but we have to remember them. So C is what? C is the eparterial bronchus. Remember, in the right lung, we have the eparterial bronchus going to the superior lobe, and then D is what? D is pointing to bronchus intermedius. which is going to the middle and the inferior lobes of the right lung. Okay, so in the right lung, we have some funky names of these secondary bronchi that we need to remember. So remember, we have the right and left main bronchi. The right main bronchi, here we see branching into the eparterial bronchus and bronchus intermedius. Okay. So that was the end of the DMTA presentation from Tuesday. I'm gonna do a power review. I believe the other DMTAs went over this today if you went to their review. Hopefully before you got fumigated, they were able to do that, but I'll go through this quickly in case you weren't able to go to that. Okay, so this is a review of all of thorax. Okay, this hopefully is familiar. Remember our intervertebral foramen. They're saying nicely over here. Okay. And what, well, that's kind of a tricky question. It's a little hard to tell what level we're at just because there's not a lot of context. But here we're in the cervical region, okay? I want to call this a little bit of the jaw. We're not really seeing any ribs, and these guys, if you kind of look at the relative size, look pretty tiny, so it doesn't look like we're lumbar. Sometimes you can kind of tell by the curvature of the spine. This one, not so much, so this is a little bit tricky. But the things that you should be able to identify are the intervertebral foramen, the intervertebral discs, you know, these kind of darker areas in between the vertebral bodies. Here you can kind of see the transverse processes. Remember, the transverse processes are those guys that stick out. I guess in contrast to the articular processes, which are also sticking out, but these are where the vertebra are articulating with one another. So in the cervical region is where we really clearly see this column of articular processes, okay, of the vertebra, where the vertebra are articulating with each other, and the transverse processes in the cervical region are kind of more anterior on the vertebral body. Okay. Remember that we need to know muscles. Thankfully, there aren't too many to keep track of. Here we have, and always remember side, guys. So right and left, always remember right and left, even on your written. So here, this is pointing to the most outer layer of muscle on the anterior wall of the chest. And if we orient ourselves about where we are, this is a nice bony landmark. That is the sternum. If we want to look at some of the vessels or some of the, you know, different things running through the middle of the chest, this is our what? That is our trachea, a really nice landmark to look for. It looks like we have our superior vena cava here, our ascending aorta, which is kind of turning into the arch, and then the descending aorta right here, just to kind of give us a sense of where we are in the chest. Okay, then we have a tiny little muscle lying behind the pectoralis major, which is this, okay? So be able to identify pectoralis major and pectoralis minor. You can see a pretty clear plane right here separating the two muscles. And it should be fairly clear on the written exam, you know, where that division is. If we're looking at some other muscles, remember one of the most dorsal muscles on the back is our trapezius. Here we're looking at the left trapezius. And remember this bundle of muscles that is lying right up against the vertebral column. We can't, you know, tell apart the different muscles that make up the erector spinae, so we just call this entire little triangle of muscle back here our erector spinae muscles, and this specifically is our left erector spinae muscles. Okay, if we're looking at the muscle that is just deep to trapezius, we are looking at the rhomboid muscle, and we're not going to say major or minor, we're just going to call it rhomboid. But we will name sides. So over here, we're looking at the left rhomboid. Okay. Let's see, it says like stuff to quiz. What do you want that one? Okay, so here are some things that it looks like you can try to do a I Spy in this thing and see if you can identify. So it wants you to identify transverse processes. So try and see if you can identify transverse processes on this image. Okay. I would call these guys transverse processes. Okay. It's asking for spinous processes. I don't know, that's kind of mean, but these little guys, you know, in the midline of the vertebrae, you can kind of see a little white outline indicating a greater density of bone. I would call those spinous processes. Clavicles, those should be fairly straightforward. These nice big bones here that are articulating with the manubrium and going off to the shoulders. Okay, I want you to identify the first rib. Remember, that's the kind of collar necklace shaped thing, and it is the topmost rib that you see. So hopefully you can identify the first rib up here. I want you to identify the pedicle in this image. I don't really know how I feel about that. But remember, the pedicle connects the vertebral body to all the stuff that's running, you know, the back arch of the spine. So I don't know, if you had to imagine where the pedicle is, it would probably be, you know, somewhere around here. I don't think looking at the pedicle here is very helpful. Scapula here, those are the shoulder blades. I think more high yield is the stuff that's falling. So the diaphragm is going to make up, you know, the inferior border of the thorax. It's asking for the aortic arch. This, I don't think you can really see it on here. You just kind of have to imagine it. But the aorta is coming off, you know, pretty much at the middle of the heart. Okay. And then it's going to arch around. Okay. And it's going to arch around to the patient's left. Right. Heart borders. So this, you know, if there's an arrow pointing here, what would you call that? Remember, right border of the heart is right atrium. Okay. If you had an arrow pointing here, what would you call that? That would be the left ventricle. Okay. Left ventricle. You know, the right ventricle makes up most of the anterior surface of the heart, but the left ventricle starts to sneak in, makes up the left border of the heart. Okay, I want you to identify the SVC and IVC. That's pretty hard to see, but you can kind of, you should know in general where those are. So this is where you would find your SVC. Your inferior vena cava, you should find it right around here. Okay. On my screen in this image, you probably can't see it in the video. It's like very slightly darker, so less opacity where the SVC and IVC are. But you should be able to identify those more based on location rather than based on things that you see. Okay, trachea, you should be able to identify. You should see a less opaque area, and that is right up here. It's kind of darker. We see this air, you know, it suggests it's filled with air. And then left and right main bronchi, you should be able to identify right main bronchi, left main bronchi. Okay. And this, it says label the pulmonary structures. So you should be able to do that. 3, that's tricky. So 3 is pointing to the trachea. I guess it was pointing, you know, more towards this bifurcation here. I would want to call that the carina. Okay. And then we have the right and left main bronchi. Okay. The branch off of the right main bronchi, right main bronchus, I'm sorry. And I don't know about the names in these slides because Dr. Ross in lecture made the distinction of, you know, the eparterial bronchus and bronchus intermedius. So here it's calling it the right middle lobar bronchus. Well, okay, it's pointing to this little division here. So yeah, one, they're calling it the right middle lobar bronchus, which is fine. Two, upper lobar bronchus. I think I'd be more tempted to call that the eparterial bronchus. If I had an arrow pointing here, that would be bronchus intermedius, right? Bronchus intermedius supplying the middle and inferior lobes of the right lung. Okay. This is, you know, in lab we talked about what CT slices are superior and what are inferior. So here you should be able to put them in order. What is superior and inferior? Remember, use your bony landmarks. Use where you're seeing your heart to say what is superior and what is inferior, or cranial to caudal, as this one says. So if we're thinking of what is the most cranial, what number would that be? So most cranial is going to be number 1. Here we see a nice big manubrium. We see the trachea in the middle. We see some vessels, but the trachea is really prominent. The lung spaces, we're looking at the apices of the lung. They're very small. This dark area is very small. So that tells us that we're quite cranial in this CT slice. Okay, if we're looking at the next slice, which one would be next? So 4 would be the next slice. It might be a little hard to see on this screen, so I would recommend looking at your own slides. But here we can still see the opening of the trachea. Okay. We can see the aortic arch. And it looks like we can see the left brachiocephalic vein probably meeting up with its partner here. But I would say the key thing in this is that we see the trachea still and it hasn't separated, it hasn't bifurcated. In terms of what is next, 2 would be next. Here we see the kind of splitting off of the trachea, and we're just starting to see a lot more of the vessels at the top of the heart, but we haven't seen the full heart body yet. 3 is the most caudal. We see this big, big honking heart, okay? This is a similar thing, you know, which one is most anterior. Here it asks us to order it from posterior to anterior. Okay, I think it's a little easier to think anterior to posterior, but you know, whichever way you want to do it works. So if we're looking for the most posterior image, we're not going to want to see a lot of heart. We're going to want to see the pulmonary veins plugging into the back of the heart. We're going to want to see the bronchi separating off. So just have a mental image of how all these structures lie. So we're going to say that 1, where we're really not seeing very much heart at all, we're seeing a little bit of left atrium here with the pulmonary veins going in to the left atrium. That is the most posterior. Okay, moving forward, we want to see a little bit more heart. We're probably going to want to see a little more left atrium, some left ventricle. We're still going to want to see, you know, the arch of the aorta and stuff like that. So that would be number 4. Here we're still seeing left atrium. We're starting to see some of this muscular, I don't know what I just said. This is left atrium. We're starting to see more of muscular left ventricle. Okay, we're seeing the arch of the aorta, all that good stuff. Moving more forward, these ones I think are a little bit easier. We're going to do 2 moving forward, and then 3 moving forward. So 2, we see the aorta, you know, remember that comes off of the middle of the heart. So in 3, where we don't really see any aorta or any other vessels anymore, we're starting to see some sternal stuff here. We know that this is pretty anterior in the heart. Also, if you notice, you know, the space of the ribs is getting smaller. So we're coming more anterior. Over here, the space in the ribs is quite large as we're moving forward. The space outlined by the ribs is getting smaller and smaller, and that makes sense. Okay, this image we've seen so many times, so you should be able to label every single thing in here. We have looked at it a lot. So here are all the answers. If there's anything that you're still wondering about, feel free to email me, but this we have talked about a good amount. Okay, this says, which of the label structures carries deoxygenated blood? So I don't know, the answer was kind of showing, but let's try to identify these structures and what exactly we're looking at. So here we're looking in at the base of the heart, really, from behind, okay? So this right here, if we're looking in at the base of the heart from behind, what did I just circle in red? This is the left atrium. Remember, the left atrium makes up the base of the heart. Then we have all these things plugging into the left atrium, so we know those have to be the pulmonary veins. And this kind of 3D angiogram thing illustrates a nice point, is that we have the pulmonary veins that are inferior to the pulmonary arteries, okay? Pulmonary trunk here. And then coming up off of all of that is the aorta. So we've identified all the things, and then we can say which of the structures is carrying deoxygenated blood. It's not the aorta, it's not the pulmonary veins. We're looking at two, which is the pulmonary arteries. But this is kind of a question that's asking you to integrate a lot of information, to identify different structures, and then really you need to find, combine that with your knowledge of the oxygenation state of blood. Okay, and this next slide, again, this is kind of small. You want to be able to label all the things. I'd say the easy things to label. And here it conveniently tells us we're at T2. We can also see the big manubrium here, so we know we're pretty high. Okay, 5, this what's hopefully a familiar air-filled structure in the middle. At this time, the chest. 5 is going to be our trachea. I'm just going to pull up the normal view. So this image is a little bit similar to the one of the DMTA, the day 5 DMTA slides. It's a little bit different, so it's good to practice with things that look a little bit different from what you've seen. So 5 is the trachea. 4 is this little thing behind the trachea. Here we can see a nice lumen. So 4, I want to call the esophagus. I'm going to just check down here. Yep, 4 is the esophagus. Okay. Remember when we're this high, you know, we see this big manubrium. We're not seeing any heart. We don't see ascending and descending aorta. We have these vessels in the anterior part of the chest. 2 is going to be our left brachiocephalic vein. Going up to make the superior vena cava when we go a little bit lower in the patient. Okay, then 1, 6, and 7. Day 7, so these are a common carotid. At your leisure. He tells us we're at T. We're a little bit lower because you're about 2 is pointing to the esophagus. We're also seeing the cephalic the lungs, which would be the lungs. Getting down to the level of T. Remember, we're at a very critical, very important surface anatomy point. all these vessels. So now we're below the arch of the aorta. So 1 is the ascending aorta, 2 is the descending aorta. Okay. There's superior vena cava to the right of the aorta, and remember that vessel that's kind of sneaking around left of the aorta. Because that's okay. No. Oh, okay. So 6 and 7, yeah, bronchus. Same thing. All the 5, the left pulmonary. Oh. Yeah, going off to the left. But yes, T4, T5 to say that pulmonary trunk is already bifurcated at this point. So calling the 5 is a okay, yeah. So saying that trunk is already point. So we're seeing pulmonary trunk to the left of um, 5 and is pointing to this thing that we shouldn't forget, which is we see men. Descending aorta, remember we're still going to be seeing that posteriorly. And now about what makes up at the base of the heart is going to one right border, right ventricle. What other numbers are there? 110 below. As labels for each image, and these images are not in the core. So likely to look at these different spinal levels. Okay, so that's what I would focus on here at 9. I'm sending aorta right running left is still 5, making up the anterior layer. So 4 is pointing to your pericardium. You know, we are so 3 is going to be our inferior vena cava that is plugging into our right atrium. Okay, and we can still this. Okay. What is the top arrow pointing to? The top arrow is what is under. I mean, it's kind of hard to tell. You don't say feeling, but it's pointing to the subcutaneous fat. Okay. It's pointing to all this kind of opaque, spidery stuff. Amber supporting stuff. And this last one is not too bad. Pretty colors, but we should still be able to label everything. Okay, so here we're looking at here are really only going to be local. Okay, so we're arch of aorta, and then we just need to name the different things. Coming off the arch of the aorta, off. Next thing, C, left subclavian. Okay, so now it's going to branch off into the shoulder. Expect we have this teeny coming off, back down to the floor. Must be our internal off the brachial right common core. This we already said, left common carotid. These like little. I also want you to know not, but over vertebral artery, and those are. Okay, here, remember what we're looking to identify is a range, and really the LA, because this quite tricky, really major camel hump. Whereas LAD in this imagery, so you're more likely to see one, get a better idea. What inches of left corner, right corner artery is going to look. So here, coronary artery, which remember supplies the intraventricular of the heart. Okay. Sorry about all these other arrows here, but look at the core 40. Definitely quiz yourself through them. But seriously, that's all I have.